Hello everyone, this is Shannon from That's So Po, and today I am doing week 52 of my 2019 reads. A little bit delayed because not only was I out of town for the holidays, but when I came back, I came down with the worst cold, and I spent about a week in bed. Finally, I am up and about, still a little bit sick, but mostly better. So I wanted to go ahead and wrap up the last week of 2019. Soon I will have a number of videos coming out talking about kind of 2019 as a whole. But for now, let's just go ahead and wrap up the last week of 2019. So since in week 51 I wrapped up the last of my Indigathon reading, I was able in week 52 to focus on a bunch of books that had been sitting around on my radar, on my TBR, things that I'd heard some people rave about that I had really wanted to pick up, but that didn't necessarily fit with any of the priorities that I'd had this year. So it was just a bunch of indulgent reading and things that I'd had my eye on. The first book that I picked up was such a joy. It was Get a Life, Chloe Brown by Talia Hibbert. This was something that I heard about from Kazen at Always Doing. She did a standalone review of that, so I will link her channel and that review below. I highly recommend you check those out. This is a contemporary romance that is set in England, and the main character, Chloe Brown, realizes that her life is kind of boring and she's isolated and nothing's happening, and she decides that after a near-death experience, she needs to go and get a life. So she makes a list and she starts checking things off, such as going and living on her own. So she moves into an apartment complex where the superintendent, Red, is a very interesting character. They start to have feelings for each other, but they also have to negotiate a lot of their own baggage. Chloe is dealing with chronic pain, which has not only impacted the way that she lives, but also has impacted the relationships that she has with people. Red has just gotten out of a very abusive, emotionally abusive relationship that has kind of destroyed his self-confidence. So both of them have to overcome those issues in order to be able to be together. And it's just the sweetest book. I actually filmed a standalone discussion of how much I love this book and why I think it's a great romance, so I will be posting that later this week. But overall, I just thought it was so sweet and so much fun and addressed so many cool issues. So it was a really good book. I will say there's quite a lot of swearing in this book, which isn't so much my taste, but the book was so good that it just really didn't matter. Also, there is a lot of graphic sex. So if you're new to romance and you're not as comfortable with graphic sex scenes, you may want to tread lightly, but if you're used to romance and sex scenes, it's great. Very, very nice sex scenes. So I gave this book 5 out of 5 stars and I would highly recommend it. Next, I picked up Sorcery of Thorns by Margaret Rogerson. So this is a book that I heard my cousin Jade from Bedtime Bookworm talking about. It's one of her favorite books of 2019, and I had previously read Margaret Rogerson's first book, which was An Enchantment of Ravens, and thought it was pretty good. I think I gave it 4 stars. So I had wanted to pick this up. I love that kind of beautiful, fantastical setting and Rogerson's writing. So I finally got to pick this up. And again, Rogerson does a great job with world building. This story takes place in a magical world where there are librarians who are almost more like knights in that they are in charge of all of these grimoires, and the grimoires are imbued with magic and basically alive. They have personalities. One of the best parts of this book was learning about the grimoires. Each of them has a different personality. They have different kind of foibles and things like that, and the librarians have to deal with these. There's different levels of grimoires, the kind of more benign ones and the very, very dangerous ones, and the librarians have to, carry swords and salt and all sorts of things. There are also sorcerers, magicians who have power, but they get that through basically bartering away part of themselves to demons. So it's a very, very interesting type of world. The setting is very atmospheric, and I really love those aspects of it. However, the plotline and the characters weren't quite so much my taste. A lot of it felt, rather than YA, almost middle grade. Some of it was kind of illogical and a little bit silly. So it reminded me a little bit of maybe like a Disney movie where the characters decide, oh, the only thing to do is go do this kind of absurd thing, and then they go do it. But then in this story, really bad things happen when they make those decisions. Like, I mean, the bad things that they're fighting against are actually quite bad. So that juxtaposition of sort of childish silliness in illogical decision making with really rather serious consequences was kind of weird for me, and I couldn't get into it, especially towards the end as we were getting some of the climax scenes. I found myself getting a little bit annoyed with the characters. Also, the main characters are rather young. They're young teenagers, both the main girl and the guy. And just sometimes I found that their decision-making processes were not so much my style. So overall, I thought this was really, really good world building, very pretty atmosphere in writing, but I didn't quite like the characters or the plot as much. However, if you're the sort of person who kind of wants a light fantasy that has epic proportions, this could really work for you. For me, this got 3 out of 5 stars. And the last book that I read this week was Semiosis by Sue Burke. This is a book that I had heard about from Rachel at Kalanadi. I will link her channel below. She also did a video talking about SF books that featured linguistics, and this was on the list, so I will link that video as well. I had really wanted to pick this up from way earlier in the year when I had heard, maybe even last year, when I'd heard Rachel talk about it. I just hadn't had the chance to, but this week I got the chance, and I was so glad that I did. Recently, Paul at Weymouth, who I will also link below, had talked about this idea of more contemplative, philosophical science fiction rather than, the epic space opera type science fiction. And I find that that actually is very much my taste. This book was in that vein. It's this very slow, philosophical look at many really, really fascinating issues. The premise of the book is that there is a group of people from Earth in the future who try to get together and leave Earth on a mission to create Pax, a peaceful new colony on a faraway planet, because Earth has, had issues. And they do this. However, it is difficult. It reminds me in many ways of The Martian by Andy Weir, in that they're fighting for survival, but the daily difficulties and any little thing that goes wrong is very problematic. The way that the story is told, I think, won't necessarily work for everyone, but worked beautifully for me, which is that there are many sections in the book, and each section is the perspective of a different character over different generations. So it shows sort of the evolution of this colony on Pax and how each generation is a little bit different from the one before and is adapting to their life on the colony rather than to, their previous history on Earth. This world is also very different. It is a much older world than Earth, and the plants on this world are much more advanced, and they have some sentience. Throughout the course of the book, the people and the plants start to understand each other a little bit better and start to interact. And that is just fascinating. The way that they learn to communicate and the way that they learn to understand each other's perspectives and work together. A lot of this book focuses on themes of communication and understanding and cooperation, as well as development and evolution and growth of a community. So there's some really interesting themes here that sort of look at what our nature is and what we can grow to be. I loved the themes in this book. I am about halfway through the sequel to this, Interference, so I think I will probably do a discussion video of these, the duology, once I finish that one as well, so I'll probably talk more about it then. Oh, and if it wasn't obvious, I gave this 5 out of 5 stars. So that wraps up week 52, the last week of 2019 for me. It was a great reading year, and I am really looking forward to doing all sorts of year wrap-up videos. I've already started looking at my stats and looking at the books that I absolutely loved. It's going to be very, very hard for me to choose a top of 2019 list because I loved so many books. I am really excited about wrapping all of that up and telling you about all of my plans for 2020. So keep an eye out. I will be posting videos soon.